If you want to understand the current world in which we live, rather than just be swept along in what feels like an out-of-control juggernaut, you may well be thinking of studying sociology. My name is Chris Schilling, and I'm a professor in SSPSSR at the University of Kent. And in the next few minutes I want to give you the simplest taste of some of the theoretical approaches and tools of understanding provided by sociology and cultural studies by taking a lightning quick look at coronavirus. This pandemic has reminded us that our fate is interconnected with others across the globe. Yet it's easy to get obsessed with the symptoms and the statistics and the sometimes rather confusing guidelines we receive that are associated with the spread of coronavirus. These issues are enormously important. They can be matters of life and death, but sociological and cultural perspectives encourage us to take a step back from this level of immediacy to put issues in a broader historical and contemporary perspective. They ask us, for instance, how we can account for the different contrasting responses of America and China to the pandemic. We may turn here to suggestions that while the social character of the USA was developed through an open frontier individualism, Chinese traditions of Confucianism provided a very different cultural template on which responses to lockdown could be developed. The type of questions sociology is interested in exploring include the following. There are many more, but to pick out just a couple of the more important, what do the differential death rates of white compared to ethnic minorities have to say about social inequalities in our society now and before the virus? And why is it that there appears to have been an increase in gender inequalities that's been manifest through such issues as domestic labour and homeschooling? I'm particularly interested in how the current situation has impacted on our bodily habits and identities. And to address this, we can travel back in time to the 1934 lecture on techniques of the body given by the famous sociologist and anthropologist Marcel Mauss. Mauss suggested that nations and peoples and even occupations often have their own techniques of managing the body. And these extend to walking, eating, tasting, squatting, dressing, and so on. And this showed that bodies were not wholly natural, not wholly biological, but were shaped indelibly by cultural practices. The suggestion here is that our knowledge of the world, our prejudices, our likes and dislikes are intimately related to how we are taught to unfold our senses and our movements onto the environment. Yet body techniques have been profoundly disrupted during the present period. And in looking at this, I just want to note three ways and to identify three additional famous sociologists whose work is relevant to our understanding. And let's start off with Erving Goffman, a figure that some of you may have come across before if you've studied sociology at sixth form. Goffman's writings suggest that one of the sources of stress we've experienced is probably down to getting used to a new interaction order. Now, this term interaction order refers to rules of body language and interaction, and it's linked profoundly to our sense of self. Let's just take two here. Firstly, the notion of civil inattention. Pre-coronavirus, Goffman suggested that we would often walk closely past people, but extend them the courtesy of glancing rather than staring at them, staring being a sign, a symbol of threat. Now, however, we often conspicuously move out of people's way, by 2 meters if we're following guidelines, but perhaps more frequently acknowledge their existence by making eye contact with them. We have reports of an emergent new etiquette. I'm avoiding you big time, but not because I disrespect you. And another issue would be hand washing. This would come as a kind of private biological creature comfort in Goffman's terms. And yet what's happened during the coronavirus epidemic is that it's become a central public political issue. You wash your hands not because of a private, personal, bodily preference, but because it's a matter of life and death for the social body, for the body politic. Michel Foucault, to turn to another writer, was concerned during his career with the way in which power operates on and through bodies. And he'd want us to ask questions about how it is that we're being policed, how are we being surveilled, but also how are we monitoring, controlling, disciplining ourselves. And if you look back historically, you can see that in terms of state discipline, there's been a shift away from large, heavy, ponderous, violent means of controlling individuals towards more subtle, technical modes of controlling populations. And look, we can absolutely see this in the current crisis. From thermal imaging cameras that seek to be able to ascertain if someone's got a raised temperature and is potentially a carrier of the disease, to the app that we are shortly being asked to download that might facilitate track and trace. We've got different modes of discipline, different modes of surveillance coming on here, and Foucault would be very interested in those processes. But it's not all control, it's not all discipline, it's not all surveillance. And if we turn to one of the most important sociologists in the entire tradition, Emil Durkheim, we can see that there remains room for agency, for the capacity of individuals to make a difference, and in particular for the capacity of people when they come together to make a difference. The notion of the sacred was the most important in Durkheim's work. It was a social fact which denoted that which was exceptional, that helped forge people into communities through a collective effervescence, a fellow feeling that made people sense that they were more than themselves, that they were part of something greater. And just perhaps the Thursday evening appreciations that we've been given to emergency and care workers signify that people are forging a new sense of what might be a secular sacred. Elevating health, elevating care, elevating compassion perhaps over the cash nexus. This again would be an issue that another sociologist would want us to explore. So, a tiny taste of just a few sociologists, but I hope they begin to show how we can step back from immediacy to understand things from different theoretical perspectives in the current era. There's never been a better time in recent history to develop your sociological imagination. Take care.